With record high inflation, interest rates on the rise, and fears of a recession, are the days of 997 generation Porsche 911 owners being able to cash out at the top of the market over? To get an idea of where the 997 market is heading, we first need to look at how prices have changed over the past year. And then we'll take a look at what factors caused that change and have those factors themselves changed. So if we take a look at a base Porsche 997 Carrera and Carrera 4S over the past year, prices of those models have risen a combined 12% over the last year. And if we look at the Carrera S and 4S, those models are up 31% over the past year. Needless to say, if you bought a 997 about a year ago, you're pretty happy with your investment. Next, we should take a performance look and look at the market for the 997 Turbo. For the standard turbo, prices are up 48% over the last year. The 997 Turbo S has seen prices raise 57% over the same time period. Of course, the top collector cars of the 997 range are the GT cars. Over the past year, prices of the GT3 are up 25%. Prices of the GT3 RS have risen 34% over the same period. The GT2 is also up 34%, and the GT2 RS is up only 16%, but those were already fetching quite a bit before. And of course, if you did purchase a GT car, you're probably not looking at it as a short-term investment because these are blue chip 911 investment cars. When we look at this percentage of increase, the base Carrera had the lowest rate of growth at 12%. Over the same amount of time, interest rates have risen 8.5%. So all 997 models are up at least 3.5% more than inflation. This means that prices aren't up simply because inflation has risen. So other factors are at work, but what are these other factors? An interesting trend is I've seen a number of 997 listings on the lower end of the market start to see price reductions. This may be a sign that the market has reached the highest point that it can go, at least to where people can afford these cars. Sellers up to this point haven't had much trouble moving these cars, and yet it appears that at least on the low end of the market, they're starting to have a bit more trouble. But does this mean that prices overall of the 997 are about to tumble? I'm sure a lot of affordable 997s will hit the market if you subscribe to this channel. One reason we might start to see prices become stagnant is the fear of a bear stock market. While the past few weeks have had quite a rebound from the bad stock performance we have seen for a bit, there is a fear that this may be a temporary bump and that we're still in the middle of a bear market and prices are going to tumble. While this mainly affects the upper end of the market, it also moves some people down to look at a lower market car. Since a lot of people, especially in the upper end of the 997, 991, 992 market, are heavily invested in stocks in some way. If the market's not doing well, people don't want to take a risk and buy an asset that might depreciate. Now, this does affect the entire 997 market, but more the higher end of the market, which isn't where we're seeing the price reductions just yet. But what does affect the lowest end of the market is raising interest rates. In order to try to combat the crazy inflation that we've seen, the Fed has continued to raise interest rate, usually at 3/4 of a percentage point, which is quite high. This means some buyers that used to be able to qualify for a reasonable payment and buy that 997 simply can't anymore, forcing them to look at other options. While this affects the mid to lower end of the market most, it also affects the higher end of the market, as oftentimes people who are looking to buy those cars actually do finance their cars so that they can use money that is not being used on purchasing this car to invest in forms that will have a higher rate of return. But as the Fed continues to raise interest rates, it will continue to lower demand to buy the cars. Of course, the Feds are actually raising interest rates to try to avoid a recession. Although, as many of us have already been affected by inflation and our dollar just isn't going as far as it used to, buying necessities. While an official recession has not been declared, the fact is every item across the board is costing significantly more than it did just a year ago. This adds to the fears that we are already in a recession, and many are trying to make sure they are prepared to weather any storm. Beyond recession worries and the raising interest rates, supply chain issues had been quite the issue for new cars, many of them having to do with microchips. However, we are starting to see many of these supply chain issues rectified. What this will mean is that more new cars are available and they'll start to become available at MSRP as supply starts to catch up to demand. With the 997 market, as we start to see the base 992 start to be produced, we're going to see the 991 market and 997 market potentially be affected by this, as people can now buy a new 992, where before many were being forced to look at the used car market, causing used cars in general to skyrocket in price. While the upward growth of the sports car market is probably a little bit more sustainable than, say, an SUV market, as these are usually second cars. As more new cars become available, the used car market as a whole will not grow quite as fast as it has been. But the real question is, are we witnessing a market collapse for the 997? And potentially good news for those holding off on buying that 997 that they've always dreamed of. Is it possible that we will soon be able to find many affordable 997 examples out there? Well, my thought is that the 997 market will likely level off the remainder of the year and going into 2023. Some of the lower end models will likely see prices dip as potential buyers are not able to get approved for loans due to raising interest rates. But for the Turbo and GT, we may see a leveling off, but not a significant drop. With the higher performance, those cars will remain in higher demand, keeping the prices up. While I don't think we see these crazy growth numbers, I think that steadily over time, all of the 997 market does go up, but the greatest growth will always be the GT and then the Turbo lineup. But on the mid to low end 997 market, there is likely going to be a dip within the next year. So if you have a 997 that you're wanting to sell, you might want to start getting on that now. On the flip side of the coin, if you're looking to buy a 997, you might want to hold off just a bit and see if the market does dip. Of course, no matter what the market, if you do buy a 997, you'll be buying one of the best modern Porsches that is on the market. And the thing is that the 997 generation of the Porsche 911 can simply be considered the best 911. So check out this video explaining some of the reasons why the 997 is the best 911 you can buy.